Thank
Well,
you. Thank you so
I
much, Claire, and thank you
hey,
everyone
thank
for
you.
being here. I'm Ashley Stewart. I'm the campaign strategist with Every Library, and so I'm going to go over what it is like to campaign, especially in these challenging times, but also hopefully make it so it's not so scary for people of what campaigning is. And I think a friendly version, a way to put it is when we advocate for our libraries, it's how can we align our budgets with what our mission, vision, and values are. And so let me bring up my slides here. So we will talk about communicating to campaign. And so first I want to, again, I'm Ashley Stewart. I'm the campaign strategist with Every Library. And so every library has our 501c4 side, which is our political action side, which allows us to work with grassroots, local political action committees and alliances for libraries. But then we also have our 501c3 side, which is our institute side. And that's how we're able to directly train boards and library staff. It's a library think tank, a policy think tank. So we're always looking into different policy and legislative issues for libraries and work with state libraries directly. So it's been great to have both sides, which allows us to really support libraries in any way that we can. All of our work is pro bono. And so that's another thing I always want to make sure because I think people still don't realize that. So we thank you to our generous donors and corporate sponsors. We're able to do our work for free. So that's great. So I'm the campaign strategist for Every Library. I'm a former public library director. I'm an elected official, so I'm a township trustee. And then, but my background's in social work. And so doing macro policy stuff has just kind of been in my wheelhouse. And then, of course, when you start to sign on to one committee or do different advisory councils, you get asked to do more, which is fine. It's just establishing those boundaries. But I put that up there so that you can see I wear multiple hats when I if you have any questions, just know that I've been the public library director, I've been the elected official, I've done both sides of campaign work and advocacy. So uh, ask away. And I just want to thank everybody for again being here. And I hope not to make it so scary of part of our job of library advocates and staff members is being able to again, how can we align our budgets with our mission, vision, and values, and how can we convince and get other library supporters in our community to see that as well and be right there behind us and trying to achieve those mission, vision, and values. So I first want to go into all of the challenges and issues that people have been experiencing and know that you are doing the right thing. And there's can sometimes be some loud ruckus causing people in our communities that you start to second guess yourself every once in a while of are we doing the right thing? So that being said, I like to go over when we take our oath of office as trustees and when we become public servants in our community, it's upholding the Constitution and state laws and civil rights, anything that affects us as a unit of government. So I like to emphasize the First Amendment, which we know is free speech. We hear this the most often, I think, when we talk about censorship issues and how we can advocate for the rights of our citizens. But then there's also the 14th Amendment, which is equal protections under the law. And so that is not just the people who physically walk through the door of the library, but also the books that we have on our shelves and making sure that there's equal protections for everybody, all taxpayers, physical people coming in the door, but also what's being represented on our bookshelves in the library. And that also means the Civil Rights Act and prohibits discrimination of anybody that receives federal funding, like libraries, or state funding, like libraries. Um, we are prohibited from doing any discrimination. And again, that's not just the people that walk through the doors, but also the materials that we have that we make available and the resources that we have in the library. So again, we're not doing anything wrong, even though sometimes it feels like we start to second guess ourselves. We're doing absolutely everything that we can and should be doing under the law. And then this is also a great time to look at your own library policies, your own statutes and resolutions. Um, what I like to put to is taking this time to look at your library collection development policy. This is just an example, but maybe it would be nice and helpful to include some of those laws and statutes on your actual collection development policy, similar to how we put it on our board agenda. A lot of the times when we have to do an ordinance, when the board has to approve it and we'll cite, the statute or law that it pertains to, maybe we should include that with other of our library policies, because unfortunately, we're in a day and age where people feel like it's somebody's opinion over another, but it's much more than that. And so taking this time to go over your library policies. With that being said, we also encourage libraries to get a golden memo. So it would be the library having your own attorney highlight some of this in a golden memo. How does the First Amendment relate to libraries, or the Civil Rights Act, and Michigan's, focused public accommodation laws, and the Michigan state constitution, and how libraries are implementing that in their library services, and reviewing different statutes. It's extremely important. And then it also helps staff have something easily available to reference if ever anybody does get questions. And this will go into the messaging part of your local campaign. Also, part of the messaging that we'll go into with your campaign is the library's responsibility to limit the risk of litigation. And again, it's not just people's opinions, there's legal and financial consequences to libraries if we don't. And so again, it goes back to First Amendment, civil rights, even EEOC, but there's active legislation happening right now to libraries across the country. And so us being a fiduciary agent, and we have to be responsible of our taxpayers' dollars. It's not just because we want to have these certain books on our shelves, but there's going to be consequences if we don't. And Book Riot has a list right now of all the active litigations happening right now throughout the country. And then here's some examples. Again, it's not just us saying this, but these are the legal consequences currently happening, and lawsuits in which people are winning. And consider, I want you to also keep these in mind when we start to talk about coalitions as you build your own library campaign. But these different groups are putting money behind the fight because they understand the importance behind civil rights and equal protections and civil societies, all of these. So keep these in mind when you start to think of who you want to build your coalition with your library. Okay, so now I'm going to start to talk about libraries as candidates. And so no pressure, but just like how when somebody runs for office, you have a candidate, I'm going to talk about what that means for when the library becomes a candidate and you do your campaigning. So factors that determine the residents' willingness to financially support the library is their perceptions and attitudes, not just for the library itself, but the librarians. No pressure, right? Everyone loves the library, statistically speaking, and the people that work there. And so it says a lot that people trust librarians and they are so well liked across political spectrums across the country. And so this was from an OCLC report back in 2008. And so when people think about the library, they don't just think of the building, but they think of who they get to see when they come to the library. And so again, it's talking about the library as a candidate, meaning the library and librarians, and if people are willing to put their money behind that. And again, it goes back to aligning how people are going to fund the library with the library's mission, vision, and values. So how do we talk about funding that isn't relating to usage? And this blew my mind when I started to look at all of the data, because it shows that library usage doesn't determine if they're going to vote for you. Meaning, I could list people in my community that I can think of personally of who would use the library all the time, but they might not vote for the library on the ballot. and vice versa. I can think of people in my community who never came in the library, but would absolutely vote for the library. And so that is kind of mind blowing when you think of it, because we're so used as library staff and directors and trustees that we have to get all of this data, and we have to report this data, and the data is good of who's coming in the library, like how many people are using it, what's our circ stats, but that doesn't always equate to who will vote for us. So how voters do relate to the library, and this, of course, me being a librarian, I'm going to put different reading recommendations, but people vote for us based on shared values, shared identity, personal characteristics, and predictability. They like to know, what is our mission? What is our goal in the community? How do we impact the community? Are we predictable? Are we transparent? So these are how people vote for the library. So in OCLC's report and study that they did, this is kind of the breakdown. So we have the 21%, which will never vote for the library. They're the typically anti-tax people, and they just won't vote for anything, not just the library. They just will not vote. Then you have 27% who are the absolutely, I will always vote for the library no matter what. And so our sweet spot for local library campaigns when we talk to people is that middle range. The may vote no and may vote yes, which means they're suspicious or they're questioners. And that's our job, being a unit of government and being transparent, is to inform them of what's going on, why we need this money, and why it's important, and what will happen and could happen if we don't get this funding. So where I like to start in your messaging is first think of your personal why. Why are your personal values with the library work? And what is your vision for the community? And then the next step is a plan A, plan B, which is important. So what happens if we do get the funding? And then the plan B, unfortunately, is what happens if we don't. And so it puts it in a situation where, whether you're talking to a mayor, a city council member, a county commissioner, the school superintendent, it allows them to really envision, okay, this is what's going to happen if the library does get the funding. This is what's going to happen if they don't, and shows them how it impacts them as well. And then this goes back to, too, not just providing the stats. I do like stats. I'm a research nerd, but also turning it into stories. So it's good to have the statistics of how many hours you're open and attendance, because some people do like the stats. You think of the quantitative people and the qualitative. So it is nice to have both, but also putting it into stories of how is the library a place of refuge in the community. And then you think of your circulation and statistics, and not just how many checkouts you get, but who is checking it out. Is it small businesses? Is it parents? Is it having neurodiverse resources, or any turning your stats into those stories? And then your library staff are amazing staff. We couldn't run our libraries without our staff, and what that means for the public servants, and how they provide such a beneficial service to the community, and so on and so on. So it's taking your stats and then changing it into those stories of impact. Some libraries, just to give you an example, if they know that they are going to go to the ballot, some will start like that oral history program to really document those stories, or they'll put surveys out into the community to get those quotes and the feedback from residents, anything like that to capture those stories on how you're impacting your community. So any type of messaging, the 5 C's is concise and clear, consistent and convincing, and contrasting. So when you start to develop your campaign messaging, start to think of the 5 C's, and people like things that are, again, that predictability aspect, but they don't, the story is consistent, it doesn't change, but you're also contrasting, meaning I can identify it, a need in the community, and then how the library can address that need. And then always being clear, no room for doubt. The 2793 is basically like your elevator speech. So if you only have a certain amount of time, what are the big key points that you want to get across that's clear and concise? So this again, I think is always so fascinating. So when candidates get ready to run for office, you'll see a trend, but they'll come out with their own book. But it's their way of explaining their story using their own words. And so when you, as a library, as a candidate, which is again, library staff, library trustees, even, and friends, um, when you start to think of running for to have a ballot initiative, how do you tell your story? Through your own words. And so part of the library's book includes your strategic plan, your management plan, your mission, vision, values. What are some of your fundraising goals? What are some projects that you've been in with the community? So you start to think of what would you include in the library's book of how you're going to tell your story. Another thing that fascinated me with my own personal campaign when I was the director is I was curious of what was in other people's books, and then I used that in my messaging. So I looked at local legislators and what issues are they focused on. I looked at local board meetings and agendas and strategic plans of other units of government, economic development goals with my county, school district reports. I wanted to know how many students were experiencing homelessness and how many students were English language learners and truancy rates. And then hospitals. Hospitals give you, they do a health needs assessment. And so you can do any health needs in the community. You can look at different hospitals in your community and get those needs assessments. Anything like that that helps you what is in other people's books, and then how can we as a library incorporate ourselves with that. So I was recently in Louisiana and I just pulled some random resources. And so you can do this the same, obviously, for in Michigan. And so like you can but I do this to show all of this information is readily available. So if you go to Detroit and you pick out a hospital that's there and you want to see specifically what's in that community that you need, but the goal is to show you that all of this is available online, and this is a great way for people that are introverts that don't really want to go out into the community and strike up a lot of conversation about the library. There's a lot of research that you can do on the backside that will help you build your messaging with libraries. And then we like to also show the ladder of engagement. A lot of people in our community are just unaware. We're stuck in our own routine. And before I worked in libraries, I loved libraries, but I couldn't tell you what was part of their strategic plan. And so a lot of it is people are just unaware. And so a lot of our side of being on a ballot measure or needing community support is just informing them. And then it kind of shows you how it walks people up through the different levels of engagement, all the way to advocate. And that's usually our trustees, our friends, our avid library users, or just people in the community who absolutely love literacy. It could be a retired teacher, anybody in the community that just will be your library advocate. And so that's when we start to talk about surfacing and networking, striking up those conversations, and you learn so much. And it could be physical conversations of surfacing and networking. But that's also when you could do surveys, questionnaires, focus groups. You can have people come into the library to do focus groups. But I always want to know what's working, what's not working, and then the what ifs. What if we get this funding? What are the possibilities that we could do? And I didn't know what all those possibilities were until I started to have those conversations. Like, I met with my superintendent and I was like, well, our library is really small, but we want to do all these programs. And it was through a conversation with him that he was like, oh, well, we could do an IGA, an intergovernmental agreement, and then the library could use the school gym for different library programs, or possibilities are endless. So I didn't realize all the possibilities that were available to me as a director until I started having those conversations in the community. So anyway, as you start your campaign, part of that is surfacing and networking and talking to all of these stakeholders and community leaders in the community. And so that's when we bring up the community engagement team. It doesn't have to just be solely on the library director's responsibility, but also you can have your own team. So it could be a couple friends members, a couple board members, your avid users, a couple staff members. But then again, think of who's introverted, who would prefer to do the research side, but the people who are extroverted who would be willing to go into the community and attend meetings or have those interviews or host some coffee talks or some focus groups. One of the examples too that I like to give is, so again, I was a small town public library director. And in one of the surveys, I asked, is there anything keeping you from coming to the library? Is there any reason why you don't come to the library? And quite a few people responded, the stray dogs in town, which I would have never thought of had I not asked a question, is there anything keeping you from the library? So again, it's how you word your surveys and you could get some responses like I would have never thought of that. So power mapping and coalitions. So this is when you start to think of who else is in your community that also loves libraries, not just people, but those different institutions and organizations. And there's so many programs that we already partner with at libraries. And so who would get behind you as far as if you do needed to do a ballot measure? So when you start to do your power mapping, Saul Alinsky, he's an American activist, and he said, work within the systems that are already in place, which makes sense. It's a lot less work to already work within the systems that you already have. So that means thinking of who holds positions of power in your community and asking them. So for example, our school district just had to do a ballot measure for increased security for schools and some building maintenance that they needed to address. So the superintendent approached me as the former library director of, hey, would you be willing to help us get this information out there? Again, not telling people how to vote, but just letting them know why it's needed. And so just like that, if I needed something at the library, I would reach out to him. So it's thinking of who is in your community that is a leader, I guess. Leader, well-respected, somebody in that position of power. So your stakeholder groups, you have the relational, which is who do you already have a strong connection with? The ideological, which means who just loves literacy and who loves the idea of a civil society with libraries in it. The aversion, which some people will come support the library because they have such strong feelings for censorship, or they have such strong feelings for, it's basically, we don't like the other opposing side so much that we're going to come support you just because of that. And then you also have the access, which it happens, but the people who are going to come support you just because it might make them look better. So those are typically why people will come support you. And then I like to give an example of what that looks like. So when you start to think of who would come support us in our library, Millage and ballot initiative, you think of who is connected to the library and using that network. And so this again, who else cares? And so coalitions are formed whenever there's organizations that come together for the same policy goal. So who else would benefit from the library getting that millage? Again, a lot of typical ones, and I know it'll come up in another slide, but you think of schools or civic organizations, even chambers, talking about the return on investment for libraries and the community. So building these coalitions for libraries is a way to ensure that the library has the ability to develop and maintain that power in your community. The other thing that I noticed for me is once I started to put myself out there, that's when I started to get asked to, hey, do you want to be on the school district's planning committee? Or, hey, do you want to be involved with this committee or this board? Or it's really great when librarians are not just in the building, but they start to get out into the community. And that's when you start to get invited for other committees. So here we go again. So those coalitions, unions, League of Women Voters, food pantries and shelters. It's using all of those networks and systems that you have in your community and just being more strategic about having those conversations of what the library needs and that this millage could potentially be on the ballot coming up. So we'll talk about the voters. So I will not go into all of this. You will get copies of slides. A lot of these will be hyperlinked, and so you can look at it in your own time. But OCLC did the From Awareness to Funding, and so they really did a deep dive in how people feel about libraries and their likelihood to vote for libraries on a ballot. And so it covers funding predictability and support and basically anything you need to know about how voters feel about libraries. So the first one was in 2008, so it's a little bit dated, and even the updated one is still a little bit dated, but it's still nice to have how do voters feel for libraries. And the great news is the majority of people love libraries. And librarians. So some other random statistics about voter views for libraries is millennials and Gen Zs typically use the library at a higher rate. Parents are more likely to use the library than adults without children. And then 55% view libraries as a essential local institution, 58% advancing education, and all of these positive views, majority views, what doesn't matter is the number of library visits, the number of library cards that are issued, or the political party affiliation. It's cross all of that, which again, I think is just so fascinating. And then last year, parent perception survey. So every library, our institute side partnered with Book Riot, and we did different surveys, and they're all hyperlinked that you can look through at your leisure. But we really wanted to see, well, how do parents feel, both with public libraries, with school libraries, and in general? And so overwhelmingly, 85% of respondents, again, cross political spectrums, cross demographics, 85% of respondents say they trust librarians. 58% said librarians should be the ones making decisions for the books in the library. 92% of respondents said libraries are safe spaces for their kids. So just looking at all of the stats, you can see the overwhelming support for libraries, which is a great thing. And the links that you'll be able to go through, again, at your own leisure, but I just wanted to put all of it out there just so whenever you decide if you want to come through all of it, it is there. So part of putting it on a ballot, there is some work involved. So these are worksheets that you will have as well, but it lets you start to work out your political landscape. How does your community feel about libraries? How to develop your budget. So part of your library's budget can go into a ballot measure because that is part of just, you need the financial security of the library to run the library. And so how to develop your budget with your existing library budget of what it might take to get it onto the ballot. So there's linked worksheets that you'll be able to go through, and don't hesitate to reach out to me too, and I can get it all to you as well. Another thing we have to address is responding to opposition. What is great is when the library is able to get your own message out with your own words, and it's clear and concise and consistent. You will be less likely to get opposition. Now, opposition will probably always exist in one form or another. And so another good thing to plan for is how you will respond to it. So no matter how big or small, it's always good to think about how you're going to message against the opposition. And so think of how you want to face your critics. And so what I tell libraries is, for my staff, when we received opposition, I had an FAQ readily available. I made everything as transparent as possible. So budgets and strategic plans and policies, everything was on our website. Everything was transparent. The unanswered and unengaged opposition. So it's better to address it because they will continue to get their message out. So us on our side, we equally have to continue to get our message out. So responding to it is, what does our social media policy look like? Who's going to be the one to address it online? who's going to address it face to face, if people are willing to go to board meetings and other community meetings. When libraries are going to the ballot, that means you can go and present information only to other community meetings. So and I always like to give examples of other people. So the superintendent was going to township meetings and Rotary meetings and library meetings, but it's any way that you can get that information side out there to the community. Um, Also think of printed press too, and I think that will come up. The library getting a newsletter out, the library doing a radio ad, the library doing anything that you can to get your message out there with your words of why you need this millage and that plan A, plan B. What's going to happen if we get it? What's going to happen if we don't get it? So again, your opposition will do their research. A lot of opposition will do FOIAs. So we always just encourage, just be very careful of what you can do during library time with library issued equipment or emails or phones, what you can and can't do when you're off the library clock. But just prepare your responses. You can listen to the opposition, but you can also do their research. So if they're going to do their research, you can also do your research. Some library groups have decided to make not like fake accounts, but basically sign up for their newsletters or join some of their groups. I found when I started to go to local community meetings, it typically was the same group of people opposing a school board initiative were kind of the same ones that would go after the library initiative. So you start to learn who and what their messaging is, but that also helps you build your rebuttal whenever anybody wants to ask or cry or twist words or whatever the opposition is using. And then for library board and staff, again, you absolutely have the right to do an information campaign. It's part of the responsibility of having that sustainable plan for the library, and funding is part of it. And another thing that I try to tell people that's not as scary is the sustainability. If we don't buy our own homes to let it just depreciate and just let it, an HVAC fall apart or foundation issues or whatever. So if we don't treat our own homes that way, the community should never expect the government buildings to just dilapidate, So anyway, it's turning the messaging to that investment, that sustainability, that economic development, that community well-being, and sustainable community. And we can help with a lot of that too, of different articles that are available about returns on investment with libraries. But anyway, I digressed. So what library board staff can and can't do, board and staff, I should say. And then just be careful of the FOIAs. People can absolutely participate in a vote yes committee, but again, just not on library time with library dollars. What people do in their own time, you absolutely have the right to do. You are a citizen, so you have voting rights just like anybody else. But just know, and I know some civic employees, civil employees, anyway, there's even more restrictions for them. So just be mindful of what you can and can't do. That's really all we ask, because we've seen campaigns lose right from the get-go just because of some errors that are easy to do. So just be mindful of that. When you do have to do a millage ballot initiative, Ballotpedia is a great resource because they have many examples of library ballot measures throughout the country. And so if you need help with your language or wording, that is a great resource for people to use. And then we always recommend using local. Check with your state, check with your county. We're not attorneys, but work with somebody local who would be willing to look over your ballot measure, just because you want to make sure all your T's are crossed and all your I's are dotted. And but they have some amazing resources for libraries that need to go to the ballot. And then again, with your marketing, library budgets are already limited. And so think of how the people and the voters in your community get information, and then make sure to use those same methods to get your information out there. If you know a lot of the voters go to a city newsletter, or if they go online, or do they come physically into the library to get news? Do they go to a local diner, and then you could have a flyer up at the diner? So, however, your community receives information, just think of that when you're trying to decide your campaign budget of how you're going to get that information out there. We at every library have a lot of resources for you to use. If you do have some censorship issues going on, absolutely use the Fight for the First platform. We have a whole bunch of examples that if you want to see different library examples, we can help you. But Fight for the First is there for you to use. And then I just love to see people around the country coming together for libraries. Just warms my heart. So again, the majority of people love libraries. We just need to get the information out there, and have a strategic plan on if there is any opposition in your community. So it's rallying around those library supporters. For state libraries, every library, we do provide some legislative samples. So that way, if there's any way that we can help statewide, we are there. We are happy to help in that front as well. And now we have an election season happening currently. And so Libraries 24, we have two platforms. So Libraries 2024 is based on our Every Library side, and then Vote Libraries is our Institute side. But we basically have a whole bunch of resources on encouraging civic engagement and getting people registered to vote, and getting people actively involved with different civic life in your community. So Libraries 2024 will show you different legislative issues going on, and then Vote Libraries, like just getting people informed, residents informed, I should say. And then here's our team. So we're a pretty small team. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. We also are happy to do localized training and support. I've zoomed into board meetings. I've zoomed into friends meetings. Any way that we can support you in your library, we're happy to do so. We will be at PLA. If anybody is planning to attend PLA, we will be there. But yes, any way that we can help, we are happy to do so. And then we also have our library advocacy and funding conference coming up, and we have group discounts for state library associations, or however you want to do that. I think even just if you buy so many tickets, you get, or if you get so many people registered, you get one free. I can get you all of that information, but that is coming up, which will be really exciting. Anything from coalition building to marketing to we have people from DC talking about political strategies on how to get people informed with your campaign. So it'll be really interesting. So just put that in your calendar if you're interested. And another thing I highly want to promote is our Institute side also has the Political Librarian Journal. And so we get writers from all spectrums of experience, again, to political analysts, to digital advocacy, like digital literacy. I'm trying to think, just all walks of life. And so some of the articles in the Political Librarian might have some of the answers that you're looking for. So anyway, so different publications that people might not be aware of. And then me as a librarian, I will always provide reading recommendations. And so every library authored the first two books before the ballot and winning elections. But other two books that have been extremely helpful is the Three Languages of Politics. So it's how to develop your messaging for different political parties. And then The Political Brain is the psychology behind politics, which I always think is so fascinating. And then other recommendations, if you're interested, is if you are going to run a campaign, there's a plethora of campaign books out there, on and just politics in general, like how people feel about politics and what they're, um, yeah, just the history of it too is all it's fascinating. So anyway, and then follow us on any of our media platforms. We're here, and I am here to answer questions now.
Um, I actually have a question.
Yes, Claire.
So when you were talking about the uh, polls and stuff,
Yes.
one of the things that I notice a lot in my job with the legal stuff
Yeah.
is, are there any polls, or at least I would be very interested in seeing some kind of poll that talks about or has a question in it that refers to the difference between a school library and a public library.
That is a great
Because
question.
I don't think the public really knows that they're different.
Yes.
And so there was some information you had on your slide about how people feel that school libraries should be able to censor and ban materials, but but how does that relate to public libraries and that same material?
Yes.
And here in Michigan, we even have a library type that is called a school public. So it's a public library established by a school board. So it functions in both.
Yes.
So
Yes.
so
So,
I that's an area that has always fascinated me, is this idea of,
yeah.
I think, and in Michigan, our public libraries actually in history were entangled with the schools. So there's a long history there. And I think a lot of members of the public really don't understand the difference.
Yes. Great point. That book riot, when we teamed up with Book Riot
Mm-hmm,
to do those, like you said, we did start, there was a trend just in those surveys of it's parents seem to want more restrictions and or allow censorship more so with school libraries, because I think it's the idea of, the school's responsible for those kiddos when they're
right,
there,
right.
and all of that. So yes, there is some of that data in the surveys that we did, um, but it's also it's
There's a
I
lot of,
understand
yeah,
the
I find
concern
that
of parents.
there's a lot of carryover where parents think
Yes.
that public libraries have that same responsibility, where in fact they don't.
Yes.
Nor do they have the same authority. So even if libraries wanted to restrict, they really couldn't, because
Yes.
they don't have the same authority over kids that school libraries do. So
Yeah.
I think that would be an interesting number to see exactly how convoluted is that in a voter's mind.
Yes. And a lot of times, like you said, they can't really define everything, which so much of it goes back to information.
Mhm,
Parents, I think a lot of the conversation is around the parents' rights right now. Like, well, these are my
mhm,
rights as a parent. But I do think as a whole, more discussion needs to happen about the child's right. And under the Constitution, the child has a right to access
mhm,
material that is for them, for their reading comprehension level.
mhm,
Um, and it goes, there's
mhm.
a lot of
Oh yeah,
misinformation right
yeah,
now about, well,
yeah.
this book is in the kids section. Well, it's
Mhm,
not really that kids book. That book
right.
specifically that keeps going around on the internet
Mhm,
was actually a young adult
right.
book or teen.
Yep.
So, um, if you are experiencing that opposition, a lot of it unfortunately does go back
Mhm,
to misinformation that's in the community. And I have seen some libraries just say, come walk through
mhm,
the library.
mhm,
Um, it's almost like see for yourself what you think is in the kids
mhm,
section is not actually in the kids section, or
mhm,
just really inviting the public to come into the space. It's easy for some people to be keyboard warriors and try to
mhm. Oh
spread
yeah.
that misinformation without actually coming in.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm,
like I said, a coffee
mhm,
talk or focus group,
mhm,
or some libraries in a playful way, not,
Hmm.
but it's like almost like a scavenger hunt or
Hmm.
use our online catalog system
Hmm.
or, one of those. But
And it's actually starting to be a thing where, in at least in the court filings and stuff, you see a lot now where when traditionally when we were talking about kids having constitutional right, we would use things like
yeah.
Tinker or Pico or these cases where they would come out and
Mhm.
say that in the context of schools. Well,
Yeah.
now attorneys for people who are on maybe a different viewpoint are now starting to say, well, you can't use that here because those are only for schools. Those aren't public library cases. And I also find that interesting. But anyway,
Yeah.
anybody else have any questions? Because I could talk for a long time.
I feel like ALA, though their website has a whole list of, and they might even break it down between school legislation, like case law
Yeah,
examples, and public.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, we do too.
yeah,
I do too. It's just it's been very recent that I've been seeing
yeah,
attorneys start to get courts to differentiate the difference between the cases on kids in the schools and in uh, public libraries. That's been a very recent thing that's come up, I think, because a lot of opinions have gone the way that libraries would like to see them go because courts look at Tinker and Pico.
yeah, yeah.
So it would be very
And now the
interesting.
obscenity test, the Supreme
Right,
Court's
the Miller
obscenity test.
test. Yep.
Yep. And
Yep.
so I always say every material in the library has had to pass the obscenity test. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, we say that too. And there's nothing in your library that's obscene because if it was, it'd
right.
be illegal to have. Yeah, we tell them that too.
Yes. Uh,
Anybody else have any questions about your millage campaigns or about talking to
yeah.
stakeholders? Here in Michigan, we have a lot of areas where municipalities won't even talk about putting a millage on the ballot because they don't, their citizens don't want millages. Like librarians can't even get past that initial, can we get a millage? Municipalities cut them right off. And so it'd be nice to know, how do you have that conversation to say, look, libraries have to get paid for. So,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it goes back to like help us help you. And that's when, unfortunately, but there's a lot of people that are stuck in their own, like a mayor's only going to worry about the city council
mm-hmm,
or, but
mm-hmm,
it's letting them become informed of, well, if we fail, you fail, and this is how.
mm-hmm,
Or, oh, you want to address, and that's kind of when I use their own wording and language too, because if I was able to look at their strategic plans, or if I know the city really wants to get some more resources for mental health, or they're trying to deal with an increasing homelessness population, or anything like that, I would say, well, I see that you're doing this, and this is how the library can help with that. Um, and just going back to the community well-being, it takes us all. And so
mm-hmm,
if one of us falls, it's going to impact the community well-being for everybody else. Um, so just kind of turning it into what their focuses are on, what
mm-hmm,
their budgets are currently. Because if they're spending money on something, then I would hope that this is going to be something that they are invested in, literally and figuratively. And so, how can the libraries be a part of that too?
right. I think in Michigan, there's a lot of competition for money. I think
Mhm.
some municipal officials feel like, okay, so there's a limit to how much money voters will put up.
Yeah.
And so they're competing because a lot of municipalities in the state are hurting right now. And
Yes.
so they look at libraries as competition for money, and they don't look at them as another asset to the community. Not all of them, but there are ones that
Yeah.
definitely are in that space. And it's really hard, um, to have that conversation.
Yes. That's a great way to put it too. And I go back to when I, just using a personal example, just because I know
Yeah.
it,
Oh, yeah.
but when I went to the superintendent, it's like when you do start to have those conversations, like if he knew he had to do a ballot initiative and I knew I had to get levy in our area, it's a
Hmm.
levy increase. We were like, okay, we both need this. people are typically, or hopefully when you approach it with a let's help each other win kind of a
Mm-hmm.
situation. But that's when we realized that there were ways that we could save money or do other things. So then when we did go to the ballot, residents felt like, okay, you're making an effort in other places, meaning I was able to partner with agencies in the community to get tutoring, to get
Mm-hmm.
social workers, to get translators and interpreters. So that was going to be an asset to the community, like the students
Mm-hmm.
and families that needed all of that. And so in turn, he agreed that the school, because we were right next to a school,
Mm-hmm.
that the school district would do our landscaping for us, that the
Mm-hmm.
school district would allow us to use the gym for partnering programs, that the school district would contribute to our collection for a certain targeted materials that he knew that students and families needed. So when you have those conversations, it's like, okay, well, if there's ways that we can work together for these other things, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. I
Yeah,
don't know if I'm
no.
making sense, but
Oh,
if
you
we're
are.
willing to try to save money in certain aspects, then the residents know when
Mm-hmm.
we're coming to you, we really need it. And we can't
Right,
do all of this if we don't get that funding.
right, right.
Yeah.
So what do all you guys think? Do anybody have any stories they want to share? Do you have any questions you'd like to ask? Now's your chance. You have this authority here. You can unmute, you can put it in chat. Let me ask you this. So
Yeah.
in Michigan, I'm just going to keep picking your brain while we have time.
Please. Yeah.
And if anyone has a question, please interrupt us.
Yeah.
In Michigan, we have 3 different times of the year when you can go for a millage. Okay, so you can go in May,
Mhm.
you can go in August, and you can go in November. Is there a kind of a strategic uh, time that is better to go?
Great question. What we are seeing is what matters more so is what else would be on the ballot. And sometimes it's kind of a chess game of we haven't really seen too much of a difference as far as primary versus general
Mm-hmm.
elections. Um, but more so what else is on the ballot or what else is going on in the community at that time. So it's kind of a vague answer, but I know some people are nervous potentially of going to the ballot in November, but there's
Mm-hmm.
actually some other. So, for example, it's like, oh, well, we might be scared that a lot of people won't support libraries in November. But then the other argument could be, well, you're getting more voters. And if there's other things on the ballot that they're going to be passionate about, you might actually get more votes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, yeah, it's just a game of chess and
Mm-hmm.
strategy. Um, and yeah, what else is on the ballot at that time in your community, not just a
Mm-hmm. Right,
global, but like,
right, right,
but
right. And here I know, at least in my own area, November is tough because there's a whole line of millages. And so
yeah.
sometimes they're all at the end of the ballot and you're reading through, 8 millages. And a lot of times libraries are at the very end. So by the time you get to the
Yes.
end, you're either like,
Yes.
oh my
Yeah.
God, yes, just to be done, or you're like, no, no, no. And so that I think sometimes can hurt us. And I see that Shirley is on. Shirley Bursamo is someone in Michigan. She's a longtime library trustee and a consultant, and she works with a lot of libraries in Michigan on millage. I don't know. Do you know
Yeah.
Shirley? And she's very successful. So I'm curious, Shirley, what's your opinion about when to go on a ballot in the year?
Well, as many of you know, I advocate August. I think
August.
there's so many ways to promote libraries in August. It doesn't matter if it's a presidential primary, it's just a good time to do it. There's so many ways to participate with parades, farmers markets. It is the summer reading program for children. There's just a lot of way to get the information out without spending buku bucks. The another reason for August is if by some chance there is a loss, you can go back again in November. it's a very quick turnaround, but you can go back again in November. And of course, in Michigan, you can only do 2 millages for the same purpose in 1 year. So, and there is a number of reasons, and I have been very successful in what I do in August. 1 year I did 22 in August and one all 22. It was a lot of work. I probably wouldn't do that again right away. But anyway, that is, people are out and about. Also in Michigan, in the winter, we have snowbirds. And so it's a lot
Right.
better to get the millages earlier because the snowbirds are already, many of them leave now for Florida the 1st of November. And so that is, and then it's good for the absentee ballot mailing that they get back in the mail in a timely manner in good weather. So no, I'm a huge proponent of millages in August.
Oh, that's a good point.
That is excellent. Yeah, for sure. And you, Carol, right? Did
Oh,
you say Carol?
Shirley.
Shirley, I might have you, I might defer to you for the next one because you know Michigan more than I do. But are there any specific millages that you would avoid? Like if you see one on the ballot already and you're like, oh, the library's going to have a terrible chance if it's with this one, or is it about the same, do you feel?
There are people that think that way. I do not. A library is a library. There's, oh, you'll have a supervisor. Oh, we can't do that. We got police on the ballot. We got fire on the ballot. Are they going to the library? Probably not. You know, the library deserves the same time and chance as they do. And I had a couple supervisors apologize to me for not letting the library go on and knowing full well that it would have won and it wouldn't have taken out any of the others. No, each one has their own need. You know, libraries are cradle to grave. There's not a person, a human being that isn't involved in libraries. And we need to keep that in mind. And if you have a millage due and your library is going to close, if you don't do it, you do it. And so, no, I appreciate your question, and it's a good one. And don't worry, we've hailed that a few times. But no, I just think library has its own reasons, its own needs, and like I say, it covers every person from cradle to grave.
Thanks,
And
Shirley.
if there's a group of you that all need to go to the ballot, if it would be helpful to create a cohort or, you know, our services are pro bono,
Oh,
but if it would be
thanks.
helpful to create a cohort where maybe a group of you guys are going around the same time and then we can all do group calls, whatever would be easy
Ah,
and would make sense for people, we're happy to do that as well.
that might be a really good idea, Ashley. I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I also have, how far ahead do you think should libraries start thinking about it? Um,
So it could be 10 years as if you know, like, doesn't have to be. But some people know, oh my gosh, our building is only going to last this much longer. So just having, and that is just like very skimming, like we're going to need this funding at some point, and you start to do that, from there. But typically, our information side is 24 months out, 12 months out, where you start to really, okay, here's what we need. We need to get our messaging down. We need to get a group of supporters. It typically is, I would say, for the information only, definitely 24 months if you can, 18 months, 12 months for sure. Because here's the other reality, and some of these situations, sometimes libraries don't have a ton of time. Something could happen, a city council could throw it on the ballot, you just never know. So we can help at any point. I definitely think that 24, 18, definitely get started if you're 12 months out.
Awesome. And what is the best way to, if a library wants to reach out to you, what is the best way to get a hold of you? Is
Yeah,
your email,
send
your
any of
phone?
yeah, you can send
Okay.
any of us an email. Um, we all kind of have our own roles. If you
Okay.
do campaign strategy work, it would be me. Uh, Peter, if anybody's met Peter, Peter does our Library Alliance side. So if you ever need a Library Alliance website or developing coalitions, things like that, Peter can help. We all kind of have our own role, but yeah, if you just reach out to our email, even if it's just our info only or me directly, we will get you going. That's for sure. And then Claire, if you do decide to do, thank you. If you do
You're welcome.
decide to do a cohort, we can figure that out too.
Yeah, I was thinking that we have, so Michigan, in addition to the state library, we have library cooperatives, and I know a couple of the cooperative directors are on this call. And they, so, there's 11 of them in the state. So you can think of it kind of like regional, and then the libraries within their areas, kind of group together. So it
Mhm.
might be nice
Yeah,
to,
yeah.
I was going to reach out to the co-op directors and see, okay, how many of them have people with millages, because that might be a way to get a cohort going.
Mm-hmm.
And then also information would be kind of like preserved, so to speak. There'd be
Yeah.
some resource. And I see Kate has undone her camera to pop her head out. She's one of
Yeah.
our co-op directors. Um,
The other thing that we have to offer too at every library, we can help you with a website, but also like if you need a committee or anything like that down the road. But also we have templates from all over the country. So flyers that people did for info only campaigns, door hangers, samples of yard signs, samples of FAQs. We have all of that. So if
oh,
you need any
awesome.
of it, just yeah, don't hesitate to reach out to us.
That's awesome. Okay. Definitely
Everyone.
be reaching out to you,
Okay,
Ashley. So thank you so
great.
much. I really appreciate you doing this for us.
Thank you. And thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Ashley.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.